The stars above had witnessed the rise and fall of countless civilizations, each unique in its struggles, triumphs, and eventual extinction. For most, it was a simple cycle born out of a thirst for progress, a hunger for power, or the desperate fight for survival. Civilizations would rise, mature, and eventually crumble, their legacy either scattered to the winds or forgotten entirely. But as the countless empires of the galaxy expanded their reach, sending scouts to chart the unknown, none could have predicted what would come to pass when the humans of Earth, a seemingly insignificant species on a quiet blue world, began to stretch their own grasp into the vastness of space. At first, they were simply curious explorers. The humans built their ships and pointed them toward the stars, eager to learn and to see what lay beyond their home planet. They made contact with other species, formed fragile alliances, and traded knowledge and goods. The galactic community looked on, amused, perhaps even a bit condescending, as humans fumbled their way through the intricacies of interstellar diplomacy and technology. They were, after all, a young species, just beginning to explore the farthest reaches of the galaxy. But they were also far from the first to venture into the stars, and many had assumed that the rise of human civilization was merely a flash in the pan, another passing phase of no real consequence. It wasn't long, however, before a handful of the galaxy's oldest and most powerful empires began to take note. They were not amused by the humans' curiosity, nor by their growing presence. The word began to spread through the ranks of the galactic elites, through the secretive councils and shadowy networks of the most powerful species: humans are too dangerous. The phrase was not one uttered lightly. The galaxy had seen its share of destructive species, of warlords and conquerors, of civilizations built on the backs of slavery and oppression, and yet the warning about humans carried a weight that even the most feared empires could not ignore. The reason was simple: humanity's capacity for destruction was far greater than any species before them. More than that, it was not simply their weapons that made them dangerous, it was their nature. Humans had the unique ability to adapt, to learn, to grow stronger when faced with adversity. They could create technologies that could obliterate entire fleets, but just as easily they could evolve in ways that allowed them to overcome every obstacle that stood in their path. And perhaps most unsettling of all, they could not be easily reasoned with or intimidated. The humans were unpredictable, wild, untamed in a way that unsettled even the most battle-hardened warriors. The first warning came from the Votrians, a species that had long held dominion over a massive portion of the galaxy. Their empire was one of the oldest, and their methods of maintaining control were both subtle and brutal. The Votrians were not a warlike species by nature, but they understood the value of power and knew how to manipulate and control others. They had watched the humans with growing concern as their presence began to spread, their influence seeping into the very fabric of the galactic order. At first, the Votrians attempted to engage with the humans diplomatically, offering trade agreements and promises of mutual cooperation. But the humans, ever cautious of authority, responded with an unusual mixture of suspicion and defiance. They weren't interested in submission, nor in following the dictates of the Votrians. They wanted independence, freedom, and the opportunity to carve their own path. The Votrians were not accustomed to being defied. And so, they made a bold decision: they would warn the rest of the galaxy about the threat posed by the humans. They would call for unity among the galactic powers to either contain the human expansion or eliminate it altogether. But when the Votrian leaders presented their case to the Galactic Council, they were met with resistance. The other species, most of them far less aware of the humans' potential, dismissed the Votrians' concerns as paranoia. The humans are just a curiosity, they said. They lack the resources and the will to challenge us. But the Votrians knew better. They had witnessed the humans' rapid technological advancements, their ability to adapt to almost any environment, and their unsettling tendency to find solutions to problems that would have stymied any other species. The humans had created weapons capable of decimating entire fleets in a matter of moments, but more disturbing than that was their ingenuity. They had already begun to develop biological technologies that could alter the very nature of life itself. The Votrians had no doubt that, given time, the humans would become a force to be reckoned with, a force that could topple the established order of the galaxy. The warning spread, and other species began to take notice. Some were skeptical, just as the Galactic Council had been, but others were more cautious. The Crow, a militaristic species known for their brutal efficiency in combat, were among the first to acknowledge the threat the humans posed. They, too, had encountered the humans and were astounded by their resourcefulness. The Crow were a powerful people, but even they were forced to admit that they could not predict what the humans might do next. There was no pattern to their behavior, no established norms that could be easily read. The humans were a wild card, and that made them dangerous. The Jelvans, an ancient species with a deep understanding of intergalactic politics, were more circumspect. They had long been a stabilizing force in the galaxy, mediating disputes and brokering peace agreements. Yet, when the Jelvans looked at the humans, they saw something both terrifying and fascinating. The humans had no desire to follow the rules of the galaxy, they were creating their own. They didn't see the galaxy's balance of power as something sacred, something that must be preserved. No, the humans were something new and unpredictable force that could change everything. For all the warnings, for all the concerns raised by the most seasoned galactic powers, the message was clear: the human threat was real. But the empire that mattered most, the empire that had the most influence over galactic affairs, refused to listen. The dominion of the WYR, an empire ruled by a collective of the most powerful species, held an iron grip over the galaxy. They were a conglomerate of species united by a singular desire to maintain order, to preserve their dominion over the stars. The WYR believed that the galaxy should remain as it had always been, a place where the powerful ruled and the weak bowed. They did not believe in the notion of change, nor in the concept that any one species could disrupt the carefully balanced system they had established. The rise of the humans was seen as a nuisance, something to be dealt with, but not something to be feared. The Dominion, in their arrogance, believed they could control the humans. They believed that with enough pressure, with enough threats, they could force the humans into submission. And so, they made their move. A fleet of WYR warships, massive and formidable, entered human space, intending to send a message. The humans were to be intimidated, to understand their place in the grand hierarchy of the galaxy. The WYR would make an example of them. They would show the humans that their attempted expansion had consequences. But the humans, as had become their nature, did not bow. They did not cower before the might of the WYR fleet. Instead, they fought back. With a combination of innovative tactics, daring strategies, and the sheer determination to protect their independence, the humans decimated the WYR warships. It was a battle unlike any the galaxy had ever seen, one in which the humans, seemingly outmatched, turned the tide through sheer ingenuity and willpower. The WYR, who had thought themselves invincible, were forced to retreat. The message was clear: the humans would not be contained. The warnings had been given, but the Empire had ignored them, thinking themselves untouchable. Now, the humans were a force to be reckoned with, and the galaxy would have to come to terms with their rise. As the battle subsided and the dust settled, the galactic powers were left in a state of shock. The humans had won, but they had not simply defeated the WYR, they had shown the entire galaxy that they could not be controlled, that they could not be predicted, and that their capacity for violence, ingenuity, and adaptation made them an unpredictable, dangerous force. The humans had given the galaxy a glimpse of their true potential, and it was a potential that terrified even the most powerful species. The Dominion, wounded and humiliated, would not soon forget the lesson they had learned. And though they would not admit it, the rest of the galaxy, too, would have to reckon with the truth: humans were not a curiosity to be dismissed. They were not a passing phase. They were a new power, and they would reshape the galaxy in their own image. The old order, so carefully maintained for eons, was beginning to fracture, and the galaxy would never be the same again. For the humans, the battle was just the beginning. They had made their mark, and they would not stop. Their thirst for knowledge, for progress, for independence, could not be quenched. They would explore, they would expand, and they would challenge any force that stood in their way. And as the galaxy looked on, some with fear, others with fascination, the humans set their sights on the stars above, knowing that the universe was vast, but it would be theirs to conquer. As the months turned into years, the reverberations of humanity's victory over the WYR began to echo through the galaxy. The humans, once considered an insignificant and naive species, had proven their strength, their ingenuity, and their relentless drive to protect their sovereignty. What had started as a single, bold defiance against a mighty empire quickly turned into a series of ripples that expanded outward, pulling other empires into the vortex of uncertainty. No one, not even the greatest military minds of the galaxy, could predict what the humans would do next. The galaxy had underestimated them, and now they were paying the price. After the battle with the WYR, humanity's technological advancements skyrocketed. The humans, once limited by the technological constraints of their homeworld, had unlocked the secrets of faster-than-light travel, advanced weaponry, and bioengineering with terrifying speed. They didn't just mimic the technologies they encountered, they improved upon them, finding solutions to problems that had stymied even the most advanced species for millennia. They learned from their enemies, from their allies, and from their own mistakes, adapting quickly in ways that defied logic. The newfound power was not confined to weaponry alone. Humanity began to spread throughout the galaxy, establishing colonies on distant planets, often with a swiftness that unnerved other species. And where the WYR had once commanded fleets of warships, the humans began to build entire fleets of their own, formidable armadas that rivaled those of the galaxy's oldest empires. The very nature of interstellar warfare was being rewritten, and at the heart of it was humanity's willingness to learn, to innovate, and to fight when necessary. It didn't take long before other species began to take sides. Some, like the Crow, saw the potential of humanity's rise and sought to form alliances with the humans. The Crow were a proud and militaristic people, but they understood the value of strength in numbers. By aligning with the humans, they hoped to tip the balance of power in their favor, to ensure that their own place in the galaxy was solidified in the face of the growing human threat. Others, however, were far less open to the idea of coexistence. The Jelvins, despite their deep knowledge of galactic politics, could not shake their wariness of humanity. The Jelvins were diplomats at heart, and they feared that the humans, in their insatiable drive for freedom and independence, might upend the delicate equilibrium that had kept the galaxy stable for millennia. They watched the humans closely, waiting for any sign that they might become too powerful, too unpredictable, too dangerous. Yet, despite the mounting concerns, the most significant challenge to humanity's growing influence came not from any one species, but from a coalition of those who feared change. The Galactic Senate, an organization that once ruled over the galaxy with an iron fist, began to take serious action. A coalition of power-hungry species, those who held sway over trade routes, resources, and key military outposts, formed an alliance to oppose the human rise. They saw humanity not as a threat to their individual existence, but as a threat to the established order and order that had existed for countless millennia. They feared what humanity's rise would mean for their own power, and they were determined to stop it. The Senate, composed of the most influential species, declared that humanity's uncontrolled expansion must be halted. A coordinated series of sanctions and blockades were put into place, with the goal of crippling human trade routes and slowing their growth. The Senate even began assembling a coalition of fleets, each one larger than anything humanity had yet seen, intending to enforce their will on the humans. The message was clear: the galaxy would not bend to humanity's will. The old powers would not allow a new force to disrupt the balance they had fought so hard to preserve. The humans, however, had learned from their first encounter with the WYR. They were no longer simply reacting, they were anticipating, adapting, and fighting back before their enemies had even realized they had a fight on their hands. A series of small, surgical strikes against key Senate military outposts sent a clear message: humanity would not be bullied, nor would they yield to the will of the Galactic Senate. The humans were not simply defending themselves, they were pushing back, making a statement that they would not be confined to the fringes of the galaxy. If the Senate intended to stifle humanity's growth, they would have to face a war. What followed was a series of skirmishes that quickly escalated into open conflict. The humans, with their advanced fleet tactics and rapid ability to adapt, clashed with the combined forces of the Senate in a series of brutal engagements. Despite being outnumbered, the humans' flexibility and technological superiority gave them the upper hand in many battles. The humans fought with a ferocity and determination that was unmatched because for them, this was not just a war for resources, territory, or power. This was a war for survival, for the right to exist on their own terms, free from the control of a distant, ruling elite that had never understood their true potential. As the war raged on, humanity's influence continued to spread. No longer merely defenders of their own kind, the humans began to challenge the very fabric of the galaxy's power structure. They formed new alliances with those who saw the galaxy's old powers as corrupt and oppressive. They began offering protection to those smaller species who had long been at the mercy of the Senate's might, providing them with military support and technology in exchange for loyalty and shared resources. They weren't just conquering, they were forging a new path, one where the oppressed could rise and find their place in a galaxy no longer controlled by the few. The WYR, still licking their wounds from their earlier defeat, remained wary of the humans but had no choice but to stand back and observe. They had learned their lesson, and they knew that challenging humanity again would be a costly mistake. The Crow, on the other hand, began to cement their alliance with humanity, offering their formidable fleets as a sign of loyalty. The Jelvins, ever the diplomats, attempted to mediate, but they could no longer ignore the reality of humanity's unstoppable momentum. They offered peace talks, hoping to find a way to avoid full-scale war, but the humans, for the first time, made it clear that they would no longer be anyone's subordinates. The Senate, divided and shaken by the relentless rise of humanity, had underestimated just how quickly the balance of power could shift. They had seen the humans as little more than an inconvenience, a blip in the grand scheme of galactic politics. But the truth was clear now: humanity was no longer a mere curiosity. They were a force, one that could not be ignored or controlled. And the Senate, now faced with an all-out war they had not anticipated, had no choice but to reconsider their approach. They could either face the humans on the battlefield or seek a way to coexist with them in this new, uncertain galaxy. As the conflict continued, the galaxy found itself at a crossroads. The old empires and powers that had once ruled supreme were now fractured, their strength diminished by humanity's unpredictable and unstoppable rise. The universe was being reshaped, and the humans, with their drive for freedom and innovation, were at the center of it all. For the first time in millennia, the galaxy was faced with the possibility that the old ways were over, that the humans, a species once dismissed as insignificant, would be the ones to define the future. What had begun as a series of warnings from alien civilizations had evolved into an undeniable truth: humanity was too dangerous to ignore. The question now was no longer whether the galaxy could stop humanity, but whether it would be able to find a way to live alongside them. The galaxy's future, it seemed, was now in the hands of a species that had learned the greatest lesson of all: survival was not about being the strongest, it was about being adaptable, relentless, and willing to fight for the right to exist on your own terms. And the humans had already proven they were more than capable of that. The galaxy, once a quiet, stable collection of ancient empires, was about to change forever. And no one, not even the most powerful species, could predict where that change would take them. As the conflict between humanity and the Galactic Senate continued to unfold, the entire galaxy stood on the edge of a precipice. The ancient empires, those that had existed for countless eons, had always prided themselves on their stability and control. They had shaped the universe to their will, drawing lines in the stars and holding dominion over vast sectors of space. But humanity, with its unyielding spirit, had become a force too powerful to ignore. They had challenged the status quo and, with every victory, chipped away at the fragile peace that had existed for so long. The Senate, once a symbol of unity and control, was now fractured. Within its walls, debates raged. Some factions called for more military action against humanity, urging the galaxy's old powers to combine their fleets and crush the upstart species before it could become a true threat. Others, however, recognized the futility of further conflict. The humans had proven they could not be easily defeated. They had adapted too quickly, and their technological leaps had made their armies formidable. The sheer number of species aligning with humanity had also shifted the balance of power. The old empires, no longer as united as they once were, struggled to find common ground. Behind closed doors, the Jelvins, who had long maintained their role as mediators, began to push for a different solution. They had long believed in diplomacy and sought to avoid further bloodshed. But now they understood something more profound: the galaxy could no longer be governed by the old ways. Humanity's rise wasn't just a political upheaval, it was a paradigm shift, one that could not be ignored. The Jelvins, while still wary of humanity's unpredictability, began to see the potential for cooperation, for a new kind of galactic order. The Crow, the most militaristic of the species to side with humanity, had gained much from their alliance. Their fleets, once feared throughout the galaxy, now worked in tandem with humanity's forces. They had been astounded by the humans' willingness to engage in innovative military tactics, developing strategies that often defied conventional wisdom. The Crow had learned much from their new human allies, but they remained steadfast in their belief that strength was the ultimate currency in the galaxy. They were more than willing to support humanity's rise, but only if it served their own interests. They wanted influence, power, and the promise that the future would favor those who could wage war and command the stars. But it was the humans themselves who would determine the course of the galaxy. No longer simply reacting to the threats against them, they began to make their own decisions, setting the stage for an entirely new era. Humanity's leaders, while aware of the growing divide, were also keenly aware of the immense responsibility now placed upon them. They had not sought out war, nor had they intended to overthrow the established order, but in defending their freedom, they had sparked something greater than themselves. The humans did not simply want to win. They wanted to create something better, a galaxy where they could be free, but where others could share in that freedom too. A galaxy where cooperation could coexist with competition, where innovation could thrive without the chokehold of ancient powers. Humanity's rise wasn't just about survival, it was about the opportunity to shape the galaxy in a way that had never been possible before. For the first time in millennia, a new narrative was taking shape, one where a species that had once been considered too weak to matter now held the power to change the entire cosmic order. And change, it seemed, was coming whether the old empires liked it or not. Humanity, with its characteristic adaptability, quickly began to develop alliances not just based on military power, but on shared values. They began to form what they called the New Galactic Coalition, a network of species that had once been oppressed, marginalized, or ignored by the ancient powers of the galaxy. These species, many of them from the farthest reaches of space, began to see humanity as a beacon of hope, proof that even the smallest, most overlooked species could rise up and create their own destiny. The coalition began to grow rapidly. Humanity had always been a species marked by their diversity, their willingness to embrace new ideas, and their ability to integrate different cultures. It was this unique trait that made them stand apart from other galactic powers. They didn't demand that others follow their path. They simply offered the opportunity for others to chart their own course, free from the weight of centuries-old empires that had ruled with iron fists. The Senate, increasingly divided and desperate, could no longer ignore this growing force. The Jelvins, long seen as the diplomats of the galaxy, began to act as intermediaries between the Senate and the humans. At first, their efforts were met with suspicion from both sides. The Senate, unwilling to accept humanity's presence as anything more than a disruption, refused to yield any power. But the Jelvins, with their understanding of the galaxy's political fabric, understood that they could not stop the inevitable. Humanity's rise was not just a military victory, it was a cultural one. It was about more than guns and ships, it was about the very idea that a species could carve its own path. Negotiations began, not to end the war, but to understand what humanity wanted. The Senate, in its desperation, tried to offer concessions. They promised that humanity could have their independence, their freedom, but only if they agreed to be part of the Senate's ruling council. to follow the same rules and regulations that had long governed galactic politics. The humans, though, had no interest in joining a council that had no room for them in the first place. They had learned their lesson. The old powers would not change. It wasn't about participation, it was about breaking free from the old way of thinking. Humanity's leaders, in their hearts, knew this was a moment of reckoning. The galaxy could either evolve with them or be left behind. There would be no middle ground. They did not want to destroy the galaxy's old order, they wanted to create a new one where all species, regardless of size or strength, could contribute to the galaxy's future. It was at this moment that humanity's greatest asset, its ability to inspire others, became their most powerful weapon. The coalition, now expanding at an exponential rate, brought with it not only military strength, but also a new vision for the future. The smaller, once ignored species began to rally behind humanity's banner, seeing the promise of a galaxy where they could finally stand on equal footing with the long-established powers. The Senate, however, was not ready to accept such a radical shift. The old empires still clung to their power, and many among the Senate refused to see humanity's rise as anything other than a dangerous threat to their own authority. A final confrontation seemed inevitable. But the humans, ever resourceful, saw an opportunity to avoid full-scale war. They knew the Senate would never willingly give up its control, but they also understood that a devastating war could cost them everything they had fought for. They began to advocate for a new kind of peace, one not based on submission or forced alliances, but on mutual respect and the establishment of a new galactic order. The message was clear: humanity did not seek to dominate, they sought to share the galaxy. It was not about forcing others to bow, but about creating space for everyone to thrive. At the negotiating table, surrounded by representatives of both the Senate and the coalition, humanity's leaders proposed an unprecedented plan: the formation of a new, united government that would be governed not by the old powers, but by the principles of freedom, cooperation, and innovation. A new galactic council this time, one where all species, regardless of size, history, or strength, would have an equal voice. The Senate, though hesitant, could not deny that this new proposal was gaining traction. The power of humanity's ideals, their vision of a galaxy where every species had a say in its future, could not be denied. The human representatives spoke not of war, but of progress. Not of destruction, but of creation. They asked only for a chance to prove that the galaxy could be better, stronger, and more united if all were given an equal stake in its future. The question that remained was not whether the old empires could stop humanity, but whether they were willing to change. And as the negotiations progressed, it became clear that the galaxy, for the first time in millennia, was on the brink of something extraordinary, a chance to forge a new path, together, under the leadership of a species once dismissed as too dangerous to thrive. The universe had changed, and it would never be the same again. The humans had shown that even in the face of impossible odds, the will to survive and to forge something better could create a future none had dared to imagine. The stage was set for a monumental shift in the galaxy, and as the negotiations for a new galactic order began, the atmosphere was thick with tension and possibility. The old empires, battered and hesitant, were forced to confront the reality that humanity's vision could no longer be ignored. Yet, even as the pieces of a new framework for the galaxy were being assembled, there was an underlying fear that the past could not be so easily cast aside. A deep distrust simmered beneath the surface, and not all species were ready to embrace humanity's radical proposal. The Senate's most powerful factions, especially the Vir, a species known for their calculating intellect and vast influence in galactic politics, were unmoved by the promises of a new order. They had watched humanity's rise with increasing anxiety, and they now stood as the final obstacle to the galactic peace the humans sought to establish. While many had seen the writing on the wall, the Vir refused to let go of their centuries of dominance. They had played the game of galactic politics for so long, manipulating factions, building alliances, and consolidating power, that the idea of a society based on equality, cooperation, and innovation felt like a direct threat to their very existence. Led by their most influential ambassador, Vlaker the Shrewd, the Veer made it clear that they would not accept any form of galactic government that did not prioritize their own interests. Vlaker's logic was simple: peace was a luxury only the strong could afford, and humanity's rise represented a challenge to the natural order of galactic power. Their insistence on a new council that allowed every species an equal voice, a seat at the table, was an affront to the age-old hierarchies that had long governed the galaxy. The Jelvans, the galaxy's neutral arbiters and diplomats, recognized the mounting tension and saw the growing divide between the Veer and the humans. For all their wisdom, they were not immune to the crushing weight of history. The Jelvans feared that if the Veer refused to come to the table, the proposed peace would collapse into another war that could engulf the entire galaxy. Still, they felt compelled to do what they had always done: mediate. They urged the Veer to join the talks, promising that their voices would be heard and respected. The Jelvans were committed to the process of peace, but they were beginning to realize that diplomacy alone might not be enough to stop the galaxy from descending into conflict once more. Despite the Jelvans' efforts, Vlaker remained obstinate, his disdain for humanity's rise seeping through every word he spoke. To him, humanity was nothing more than a chaotic force, unpredictable and dangerous. And even if the humans' intentions were noble, the Veer had no intention of relinquishing the power they had spent millennia building. This galaxy is governed by the strong, the wise, and the eternal. The humans seek to change that, Vlaker had declared in one of the final sessions before the peace talks reached an impasse. Their idealism blinds them to the reality of what it takes to hold power. Without dominance, there is only chaos. It was clear that Vlaker and the Veer would not be swayed by reason alone, nor would they abandon their pursuit of control. With each passing day, the threat of war loomed larger. The human representatives, led by the charismatic and resolute Admiral Solara Vance, knew that they had reached a critical juncture. Solara had always believed in the power of diplomacy, but she had also learned the hard way that sometimes words could only go so far. Humanity had fought for its freedom, and now, it seemed, the galaxy had forced them into a position where they had to choose: submit to the old order, or forge a new one with the risks of war hanging heavily in the balance. The coalition, the rapidly growing alliance of formerly oppressed and smaller species, was growing increasingly impatient. They had suffered under the old powers for so long that they could not fathom returning to the days of subjugation. The decision was made. Humanity would not back down. They would not submit to the whims of those who sought to preserve their dominion over the stars. But they would not act recklessly. The humans understood the stakes of this war, if it came to that, and they knew they had to act with precision and purpose. Admiral Vance, in a final, desperate move to avert war, addressed the Galactic Senate one last time. The tension in the room was palpable as the galaxy's leaders gathered. The Veer sat unmoving, their eyes locked in a cold gaze with the humans. The Jelvans were watching, carefully weighing their next move. For humanity, this was the moment that would define their future. The Admiral's voice rang out with a calm but unwavering authority, cutting through the murmurs of disbelief. We stand at the precipice of history. The galaxy as it exists today is at an end. Whether that end is one of chaos and destruction, or one of opportunity and cooperation, lies in your hands. We are not asking you to surrender your power. We are asking you to recognize that the universe is no longer as it was. The era of your unchallenged rule is over. Her words were met with a chorus of uneasy silence. The humans had made it clear there would be no going back. For the first time, the old powers of the galaxy were confronted by a force that was not afraid to call their bluff. They were faced with a choice: fight to preserve the ancient hierarchies that had long protected their rule, or join humanity in building something new, something that would allow them to adapt to the changing tide of the galaxy. Vlaker, ever the strategist, stood up slowly, his expression unreadable. He turned to face the other members of the Senate, the ancient and powerful species that had once dictated the course of the galaxy. We are the architects of the galaxy's past, he said with a chilling calm. We will not bow to a future crafted by these outsiders. His words hung in the air, heavy with defiance. He had spoken for the Senate, but his words had a much deeper resonance. He had spoken for all those who feared the loss of power, for all those who had ruled from the shadows of the galaxy for eons. The threat was not just about what humanity had done, it was about what humanity represented: change, unpredictability, and the crumbling of long-established orders. But it was too late for hesitation. Humanity had long since outgrown the constraints of the old world. The negotiations had failed. The galaxy could either move forward with the humans or it would be torn apart by war. And so, with a heavy heart, Admiral Solara Vance made the decision. She gave the order to prepare for the coming conflict. Humanity would not strike first, but they would be ready. The coalition's fleets, vast and diverse, would take their place alongside humanity's most advanced warships. The time for negotiation had passed, and the time for action had arrived. As the galactic powers readied for the inevitable clash, something extraordinary began to happen. The resistance against humanity's rise began to fracture. The Jelvans, once the neutral mediators, now found themselves at the heart of a divided galaxy. While many of their kind were still wary of humanity's ambitions, there were those among them who saw the value in a new galactic vision. Slowly, the Jelvans began to shift, aligning themselves with the humans not out of fear, but out of a deep recognition that the galaxy needed to evolve. The old ways had failed. The stars, once silent witnesses to the rise and fall of countless civilizations, now seemed to hold their breath. The fate of the galaxy hung in the balance. Would it be reshaped by the bold vision of humanity, or would the old powers once again impose their will, drowning the galaxy in bloodshed? The choice was clear. The galaxy would either become a place where all species, great and small, could chart their own destinies free from the chains of ancient empires, or it would burn under the weight of its own resistance to change. Humanity, ever resilient, had already decided. There would be no turning back. The future, for better or for worse, would belong to those who dared to dream beyond the stars.